All right, let's see. So today's topic, I felt like doing a live stream. I couldn't really think of anything at the time. I like to do hard or controversial type of topics, and I've got one here. So basically, as you can see from the title is what's here on the screen: Caricom 10-point plan for reparatory justice. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through each of the 10 points, read them, give my opinion on it, whether or not I think that this should even be a thing, or are certain elements of this 10-point plan necessary, or is this something that we can do ourselves and we're just trying to put this on other people to do it for us. So I'm going to start. Just bear with me 1 second. Make it full screen. There. Right. Okay, so by the way, the source for this information, you can find it in the description, and you can also click on the Discord link to join my server called Caribbean House. The server's primarily based on like Caribbean affairs and issues and so on and so forth, but Africans are also welcome to join, and it's more of like an exchange, information exchange, learning things, just talking about different issues, making suggestions and stuff like that. Like, okay, let's say that we have something going on in our region. Africans may be able to lend ideas and suggestions, and we can do the same thing, vice versa. Because I think in terms of like our countries and stuff, there's a lot of similarities that we go through that may be still unresolved. But let's get on to the topic. So I don't have my glasses and I'm kind of tired, but I'm going to do my best to speed this through. I might not read everything word for word because it's a lot of words, but pretty much the Caricom Reparations Commission, CRC, asserts that European governments, point 1, were owners and traders of enslaved Africans, point 2, instructed genocidal actions upon indigenous communities, and point 3, created the legal, financial, and fiscal policies necessary for the enslavement of Africans, defined and enforced African enslavement and native genocide as their national interests, refused compensation to the enslaved with the ending of their enslavement, compensated slave owners at emancipation for the loss of legal property rights in enslaved Africans, imposed a further 100 years of racial apartheid upon the emancipated, imposed another 100 years, imposed for another 100 years policies designed to perpetuate suffering upon the emancipated and survivors of genocide, and have refused to acknowledge such crime or to compensate victims and their descendants. Let's see. So, context. The CRC is committed to the process of national, international reconciliation. Victims and their descendants have a duty to call for reparatory justice. Their call is the basis of the closure they seek to the terrible tragedies that engulfed humanity during modernity. The CRC comes into being some 2 generations after the national independence process and finds European colonial rule as a persistent part of Caribbean life. So I'm just trying to see if this is really relevant because I just kind of want to get to the points. Okay, I mean, essentially, the context is still kind of just outlining what's happened and kind of the aftermath of enslavement and colonialism. Okay, this one's quite interesting. The CRC recognizes that the persistent harm and suffering experienced today by these victims as the primary cause of development failure in the Caribbean. That's a really funny one. And I think, let me copy that and paste it somewhere so that I can remember to address it. Because, yeah, I have a feeling about that. I'm going to just stick that here. So it calls upon European governments to participate in the Caribbean reparatory justice process with a view to prepare these victims and sufferers for the full admission with dignity into the citizenry of the global community. The CRC here outlines the path to reconciliation, truth, and justice for victims and their descendants. So point number 1, a full formal apology. The healing process for victims and descendants of the enslaved and enslavers requires, as a precondition, the offer of a sincere formal apology by the governments of Europe. Some governments, in refusing to offer an apology, have issued in place statements of regret. Such statements do not acknowledge the crimes that have been committed and represent a refusal to take responsibilities for such crimes. Statements of regret represent, furthermore, a reprehensible response to the call for an apology, in that they suggest that victims and their descendants are not worthy of an apology. Only an explicit formal apology will suffice within the context of the CRJP. How do I feel on a formal apology for slavery? I mean, you see, this is the thing. It's kind of like what you've been taught as a child. You do something when you say sorry. I'm not really sure if them saying sorry is going to make any kind of difference, because I think as a region we're beyond sorry, and I'm not going to equate the magnitude of two things, but our governments should be just as sorry for their failures to Caribbean people. The economic setbacks, the loan taking, the corruption, the high youth unemployment, they're not investing enough in people, they're allowing foreigners to just essentially run our countries, this tourism nonsense that we hang our hats on. I think they are just as equally should be made to say sorry for all of these types of things. And what's sorry going to do if the damage has already been done? I don't know. I guess it's part, something to kickstart the process, but I don't really see words as meaning anything. You know, I think Ghana was made to apologize, or voluntarily apologize for what took place in the transatlantic slave trade, which I personally think was ridiculous, considering that Ghana didn't actually exist as an entity. So it's like, what is Ghana apologizing for? And when it comes to the transatlantic slave trade, people from that region were just as much victims as well. People were also victimized in that. So it's kind of funny how the apology had to be shifted onto Ghana, and maybe other African governments have apologized that I'm not aware of, but I think I heard that Ghana did instead of the Europeans. But I'm not really too sure if an apology is really gonna help anything, as the damage has already been done. But let's go to part two. So repatriation, which is a very, very hot topic at the minute. Over 10 million Africans were stolen from their homes and forcefully transported to the Caribbean as the enslaved chattel and property of Europeans. The transatlantic slave trade is the largest forced migration in human history and has no parallel in terms of man's inhumanity to man. This trade in chained bodies was a highly successful commercial business for the nations of Europe. The lives of millions of men, women, and children were destroyed in search of profit. The descendants of those stolen people have a legal right to return to their homeland. A, a repatriation program must be established, and all available channels of international law and diplomacy used to resettle those persons who wish to return. A resettlement program should address such matters as citizenship and deploy available best practices in respect of community reintegration. Now, this is a topic that we've all been well, as I say, we've all been. I don't know if people that kind of own that topic would be watching this, but this has definitely been a lot of discussion that I've been hearing about. Listening to YouTube and really getting more in tune with African um, YouTube content creators about this thing, specifically with automatic citizenship for us, a very small country, to give automatic citizenship essentially to everybody that's a descendant of the transatlantic slave trade, which me personally I feel is ridiculous. But something in this here, it says, right, where is it now? Make sure I just, if I missed it, where is it? Where is it? Where is it? Here we go. Right. So let's read this little section here. So this trade in enchained bodies was a highly successful commercial business for the nations of Europe. The lives of millions of men, women, and children were destroyed in search of profit. The descendants of these stolen people have a legal right to return to their homeland. Now, that's a very tricky, and I feel like it's kind of loaded. And this is the type of verbiage that's being used when it comes to, a certain movement now that's saying, this is a birthright. This is our right. I'm really curious that whoever has written this, where did they come up with the idea that this is a legal right? And who is this legal obligation on, if it is a legal right? Is it a legal right on Europeans to repatriate descendants of the transatlantic slave trade, those of us of African descent, and specifically for the Caribbean, so us African Caribbean people? Is it our former colonial countries that have this obligation to repatriate us? So, because we all have various different ones. Barbados would have been the UK, England. You got St. Lucia that had France, and then Britain, Haiti with France, the Spaniards as well. That's another thing as well where it comes to it, because we have a divide in the Caribbean between the Spanish speakers and the rest of us, French and Dutch and English speaking. Then you've also got some of our islands that are still overseas territories of the UK. I believe Guadeloupe and Martinique are still French departments. I think the Netherlands Antilles are still, I don't know I can't remember what you call it now, but basically they're under the Dutch still. So is that going to include them? Who is that going to include? And then if it's not on the Europeans, this legal obligation, then is it on African governments? Because that's going to be problematic. Again, these entities that we have now, these 54 countries, they did not exist. These weren't things. The same way how we have our countries now in the Caribbean, these are not real. These were entities that were drawn up and created by European imperialists going into the so-called New World and saying, right, this is ours, this is theirs, and we're going to, fight over these territories and claim them under our flag. So I would really like to understand who the legal obligation is on that. Let's move on to the next one. Number 3, Indigenous Peoples Development Program. The governments of Europe committed genocide upon the native Caribbean population. Military commanders were given official instructions by their governments to eliminate these communities and to remove those who survive pogroms from their region. Genocide and land appropriation went hand in hand. A community of over 3 million in 1700 has been reduced to less than 30,000 in 2000. Survivors remain traumatized, landless, and are the most marginalized social group within the region. The University of the West Indies offers an Indigenous people scholarship in a desperate effort at rehabilitation. It is woefully insufficient. A development plan is definitely required to rehabilitate this community. And I would agree with that 100%. I wouldn't say that the Indigenous people don't deserve anything. And a good book to read on this would be, I think it's called The Case for Reparatory Justice by the St. Vincent and the Grenadines Prime Minister, Dr. Ralph Gonsalves. He's written a good book, and it breaks it down, number wise. The years, the population, the documents telling you, right, which Indigenous people were moved to where, because in the case of St. Vincent, you had the French that were fighting the Indigenous people and ended up displacing them and moving them, I think, to Honduras and different parts of Central America as well. That's a good book to read. I don't really want to speak on Indigenous people because I'm sure that they have their own groups and whatnot. I've never encountered any in Barbados, but I don't really think that there are any there anymore. Let's see. But I would say, yeah, because they don't really have they don't really have the numbers and they don't really have the representation unless our governments take it upon themselves to kind of do the right thing, bring the indigenous people, don't separate them, bring them in and say, hey, what we get from this, if we get anything from this, we'll share it with you and give them just as equal opportunity. So, number four, cultural institutions. European nations have invested in the development of community institutions such as museums and research centers in order to prepare their citizens for an understanding of these crimes against humanity, or CAH. These facilities serve to reinforce within the consciousness of their citizens an understanding of their role in history as rulers and change agents. There are no such institutions in the Caribbean where the crimes against humanity were committed. Caribbean school teachers and researchers do not have the same opportunity. Descendants of these descendants of these crimes against humanity continue to suffer the disdain of having no relevant institutional systems through which their experience can be scientifically told. This crisis must be remedied within the CRJP. So I agree with that. If this is saying that it's up to the Caribbean reparatory justice process to be able to remedy that, then that's fine. But I don't think that if this is going to have to come subsequent to getting an apology, then I think it's ridiculous. We should have already been doing that, and this makes me question when we say we're independent. Our country's this, our country's that. We're our own rulers. Why is it that we didn't change the curriculum? Why is it that curriculum is still heavily based on a British system? And I'm not just talking out my backside. Like, we've got people in our Discord group that live back home in the Caribbean, and I've asked, what kind of things did they teach you in school? Did you have certain things in school? African history? No. Even our own culture that is fading away, that is, slipping through our fingers like sand, they're not even teaching in schools. And yet, now we want to talk about cultural institutions and we don't even make an effort generally to try and preserve our culture. So that's what I have to say to that. Number five, public health crisis. The African descended population in the Caribbean has the highest incidence in the world of chronic diseases in the forms of hypertension and type 2 diabetes. This pandemic is a direct result of the nutritional experience, physical and emotional brutality, and overall stress profiles associated with slavery, genocide, and apartheid. Over 10 million Africans were imported into the Caribbean during the 400 years of slavery. At the end of slavery in the 19th century, less than 2 million remained. The chronic health condition of Caribbean blacks now constitutes the greatest financial risk to sustainability in the region. Arresting this pandemic requires the injection of science, technology, and capital beyond the capacity of the region. Europe has a responsibility to participate in the alleviation of this health disaster. The CRJP addresses this issue and calls upon the governments of Europe to take responsibility for this tragic human legacy of slavery and colonialization. I'm not so sure about this. I'm really not so sure about this. Can I really, in good faith and honestly speaking, from my point of view, agree that the reason why we have so much hypertension and diabetes is because of slavery? I guess yes, in a sense that we were not given anything nutritious to eat. Obviously, everything was given to us. You were provided whatever you was given. That's what you had, and I understand that. But isn't the responsibility on us to break these certain things about the diet? Put down the pork. I don't even personally. I don't understand how people still eat pork. That gives me a headache when I have pork. It just makes me feel sick, and I had stopped eating pork many years ago. But things like eating souse, the snout and the feet and the ears, and you know, what do you call it, black pudding, all this, that's a British thing, to eat blood of a pig, congealed blood, and fry it. This is, we don't have to eat that. This is not. that's not traditional for us. People might say it's traditional now because this is something that we've been doing, since slavery and colonialism. But we don't have to eat these type of things. Thankfully, I never grew up eating none of that stuff. Um, but there are a lot of things that we have adopted from the British diet that we have no business continuing on. Again, we want to be independent and we say we have our own identity. Well, then get rid of all of this kind of stuff. And it's funny because let's say I can speak for Barbados. We have a lot of centenarians. Like damn near every single day, there's news of someone that's reached the age of 100. And what do they tell you? Good diet. And a lot of the time, some of them do eat pork, yes, but when they're telling you things that they're eating a lot of greens, they eat a lot of fish, cuckoo, okra, breadfruit, all the good provisions, the ground provisions that we have, that we're blessed with to be able to grow, eat them. Now, if we were here eating British diet all day, we wouldn't be living as long. It's too much meat, it's too much fat, it's eating blood. This stuff isn't conducive to life. So I'm not really too sure if I can agree with Europe having to take responsibility when it comes to diet, because I think we can do that ourselves. And another thing actually is, what about diet? We import a lot of foodstuffs from the US and the UK that are not healthy foods, that aren't even our foods. And I give you case in point. So you go to Carlton Supermarket, I think it's A1 Carlton Supermarket in Black Rock, Barbados, right? You go there, you walk in, and it's like maybe 3 or 4 hours to the right of the entrance. No, sorry, to the left of the entrance, pardon me. And they got these aisles filled up with UK store brand stuff, like processed, ready to go stuff, right? People in the UK that know Tesco's everyday value stuff. And some of the stuff is so basic, like rice and these silly ready meals, Indian curry meals. And that's another thing that even baffles me, because curry is readily available in the Caribbean, so I don't understand why we're doing that. But we have so many things that are imported from the States and from the UK that we don't need to eat. Or if you want to eat these things, that's fine. Why are we not putting our resources into our agriculture and into agro processing? Why are we not doing that? This doesn't make sense. We want to say that Europeans are responsible for our diet. As far as I'm concerned, let's say we all do it to the point of when your country gained independence. All right, now it's up to you to change that. I don't believe that the UK, France, Netherlands, Spain, whoever is in charge of this type of thing. To me, I think it's a bit ridiculous to put that, but maybe someone can enlighten me as to how. Right. Did I even read all of that? Yeah, I think I did. All right. Point number 6: illiteracy eradication. At the end of the European colonial period in most parts of the Caribbean, the British in particular left the black and indigenous communities in a general state of illiteracy. Some 70% of blacks in British colonies were functionally illiterate. In the 1960s, when nations let me start that again. Some 70% of blacks in British colonies were functionally illiterate in the 1960s when nation states began to appear. Jamaica, the largest such community, was home to the largest number of such citizens. Widespread illiteracy has subverted the development efforts of these nations and represents a drag upon social and economic advancement. Caribbean governments allocate more than 70% of public expenditure towards health and education in an effort to uproot the legacies of slavery and colonialization. European governments have a responsibility to participate in this effort with the context of the CRJP. You see, now the thing is, within this whole point, we're talking about, let's say, the 1960s, right? Now I can speak for my family. Both my grandparents came from Barbados on my mom's side. My grandma was very, very well educated. Her dad was quite well off. Her mother's side, not so much, but she was privately educated. I think what they called a modern girls' school at the time. So she was up there, type of thing. Not to say that everyone was up there as high as her, but let's not act like everyone was just unable to read and whatnot. But that was what, 70 years ago. Are you saying that is widespread illiteracy still a thing in Jamaica? I don't think so. Let me Google it. Hold on. Let's see. Jamaica literacy rate 2020. Okay. All right. 88.1%. According to this website, what's it called? Noma.com. All right. Let's have a look at Data World Bank. Let me see what they say. So, yeah, okay. Right. So 88.1%. Let's accept that's what the World Bank is saying. According to the World Bank, Jamaica has a literacy rate of 88.1%. Compare that to some 70% of blacks in British colonies were functionally illiterate, with Jamaica having the largest population. I think then they've made a huge stride in almost eradicating illiteracy in the country. So is it worth it? I mean, whether or not Europeans are even going to do that, and I highly doubt it. I don't think that they have any interest in even revisiting all of what they did, because they're guilty and then they will have to answer to everything. I don't believe that they're going to do that. I'm not so sure if I agree with them having a hand in illiteracy eradication and education. Again, these are certain things that our government should have been doing. This should have been a priority before. Not having people come to our countries, foreign people coming to our countries and buying up the place and raising property values so that citizens can't afford it. Having all these foreign corporations coming in and not paying enough tax. This should have been more important back then. But let's go to point number 7. African Knowledge Program. The forced separation of Africans from their homeland has resulted in a cultural and social alienation from identity and existential belonging. Denied the right in law to life and divorced by space from the source of historic self, Africans have craved the right to return and knowledge of the roots. A program of action is required to build bridges of belonging. Such projects such as school exchanges and culture tours, community, artistic and performance programs, entrepreneurial and religious engagements, as well as political interaction are required in order to neutralize the void created by slave voyages. Such actions will serve to build knowledge networks that are necessary for community rehabilitation. Let's see. So, you see, again, right? I agree with this to a certain point. But I'm looking at this is supposed to be a 10-point, essentially a list of demands, I'm guessing, to these European governments. So are we saying that we want the Europeans to set up an environment or facilitate a reconnection between African Caribbean people and people on the African continent? And if so, why? That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Why would we be doing that? How can we trust these people to even facilitate something like this? I don't understand. However, again, this is stuff that could have been done, that we could have been doing from ages ago. Again, as much as we boast independence, we boast all this independence, and yet we're relying and we're asking for these people, supposedly asking for these people, that's how I'm reading it, to facilitate this for us. If our governments truly cared about this reintegration, first of all, what they would do is acknowledge the culture that we were able to preserve, number one, and teach that to the children. If you want these children, and just us in general, as African Caribbean people to have that that sense of identity with ourselves, then this would have been promoted more. And it hasn't been promoted more. Actually, I would say it's been suppressed, or it's been largely ignored for the most part. This thing isn't taught. You might have like an African History Month or something like that, and even then, I can only say from the outside of what I've seen, it's very generic. It's very, very generic. If you were serious about that, because we still have archives, and I'm sure that our governments can commission people to come here to the UK and go to other former colonizer countries, go to the archives, read through the documents. You can look at our cultures and see that there are certain dominant groups that show up in our culture, and you can say, right, I see that there was a lot of, let's say, Yoruba elements here, a lot of Igbo elements there, the Ashanti here, and so on and so forth, the God, so on and so forth, all these different people, right? And you can look into it. You still got the Maroons scattered. The Maroons are not just in Jamaica, they're scattered amongst the Caribbean. Look at the Temne people in Caricom who made their connection back to the Temne people in Sierra Leone. Why is that not being pushed up more? Why do we need to rely on other people or have to put this in some plan that may, have to be kickstarted with an apology first, and whether or not we'll get it in order to be able to do this? Again, I don't think that this is right to put this down in a plan and say, well, if you apologize, this is what else we need for you to do. It's not for Europeans to do that. If we're serious about that, then we would do it ourselves. Not rely on some government body, some government entity to be doing this for us. So I disagree with that. Point number 8, psychological rehabilitation. For over 400 years, Africans and their descendants were classified in law as non-human, chattel, property, and real estate. They were denied recognition as members of the human family by laws derived from the parliaments and palaces of Europe. The history has inflicted massive psychological trauma upon African descendant populations. This is evident daily in the Caribbean. Only a reparatory justice approach to the truth and exposure can begin the process of healing and repair. Such an engagement will call into being, for example, the need for greater Caribbean integration designed to enable the coming together of the fragmented community. So let me just scan read that over just to make sure I fully understand it, because I don't think I fully understood that there. So this one I'm not sure of, and maybe I'll just come back to it because I'm not exactly too sure on that one. I don't know if I have an opinion. Number 9, technology transfer. For 400 years, the trade and production policies of Europe could be summed up in the British slogan, "Not a nail is to be made in the colonies." The Caribbean was denied participation in Europe's industrialization process and was confined to the role of producer and exporter of raw materials. This system was designed to extract maximum value from the region and to enable maximum wealth accumulation in Europe. The effectiveness of this policy meant that the Caribbean entered its nation-building phase as a technologically and scientifically ill-equipped, backward space with the post-modern world economy. Generations of Caribbean youth, as a consequence, have been denied membership and access to the science and technology culture that is the world's youth patrimony. Technology transfer and science sharing for development must be part of the CRJP. It's not wrong, but you see, it's all well and good knowing these things. We know the problem, we see the problem, but I'm really curious to know what solution was there ever a solution thought up about this before in the past to try and alleviate this type of issue? Because again, you look back to so-called independence, even though a lot of us are still part of the Commonwealth, but we look back to so-called independence. What have we done to address that? Because I'm sure back then they were aware that all they do is extract the resources from us cheap, the sugar cane, certain types of fabric material. We had industries, the spices, and so on and so forth. I'm sure we were very much aware of that. So what has been the solution? I'm not aware of us trying to, become more productive. And I understand, again, ill-equipped, but that's up to, I feel like that's up to the government to commission somebody to do the research. Or let's say you go to UE and you say, right, we've got all these brilliant young minds here, and we're going to send them across to different countries, learn these technologies, bring them back, and this is what we need to implement in the region. I'm not been aware of that. Maybe it has happened and I'm just not aware. But if anyone could point me to that, then fine. But again, I'm not so sure if I really trust the Europeans to just give us the technology and teach us all like that. I don't think that's right. And number 10, debt cancellation. Caribbean governments that emerged from slavery and colonialism have inherited the massive crisis of community poverty and institutional unpreparedness for development. These governments still daily engage in the business of cleaning up the colonial mess in order to prepare for development. The pressure of development has driven governments to carry the burden of public employment and social policies designed to confront colonial legacies. This process has resulted in states accumulating unsustainable levels of public debt that now constitute their fiscal entrapment. This debt cycle property belongs to the imperialist governments who have made no sustained attempt to deal with the debilitating colonial legacies. Support for the payment of domestic debt and cancellation of international debt are necessary reparatory actions. Okay, there's a source of some sort of information that I'll put in the chat. Debt cancellation. Yeah, now that's something I've had a discussion about this before with somebody who's Ivorian but live in the UK, and I'm on the opinion that debt cancellation is absolutely fair. It's absolutely 100% fair, because if you compare that to how much money that all of these people profited during that period, it's only fair to cancel the debt, because I don't think that we've ever borrowed that much money. Also consider the fact that British taxpayers have actually were actually paying off slave compensations to descendants of slave owners. So I think that we're about even on that. So that's one thing that I do agree with. Cancel the debt. Me personally, with that cancel the debt, I would also say get your institutions, get your companies, get your corporations out. Unless you are willing to pay a much higher tax rate to remain in our countries. But the only problem with that is, okay, we have a lot of infrastructure that relies on these foreigners. And again, this is a failure of the government to invest in the people so that we can run our own infrastructure, not foreigners. Because what happens is, it's like, especially with the tourism, these hoteliers that want to come and tell people that you are not allowed to go on your own beaches and bathe in your own sea, they can get away with that. Why? Because our countries rely so much on the tourism. These hotels are so necessary for this part of the economy. They have no choice but to buckle under the pressures of these hoteliers. So you're cowards. You break under the pressure of these foreigners. And this is why we don't get the respect that we should have, but at the same time we're not doing anything to warrant the respect. We allow these people to do what they want in our country. We don't seem to care enough about having pride. We love to wave our flags and jump up and so on and so forth and argue amongst each other. This one don't like that islander, this one don't like this one, and so on and so forth. But we don't have enough pride to invest in our own people. I would genuinely like to understand all these loans. Mia Motley has just taken out a new loan. I would like to see, how is this loan going to pay itself off and profit? I would like to know that. Where is this going to? Is this going to tackle youth unemployment? Is this going to be invested in true entrepreneurship and teaching real business skills so that you can have indigenous corporations and not foreign people, building up? And especially when it comes to, because we can't exclude the race element in this, right? African Caribbean people finally being able to have a good footing in our own corporate world. You know, why is that not being addressed? Why is that not being tackled? Because there is a racial undertone in the Caribbean. As much as people think it's like some melting pot and we all just get along, that is not the case. And what gets me with that as well is the hypocrisy that I see amongst African Caribbean people. In one breath, will say, oh no, we love everyone and we all just want to get along. But when another group of people are succeeding and ill treating African Caribbean people, now we want to start remembering that these people don't like us. You see, there's so many elements in this, but really and truly, the government should have been investing in the people in the first place. And I think a lot of these points wouldn't even need to be necessary. But I agree 100% with debt cancellation. It's only right, it's fair, it's equal. They had all these years of free labor. It funded the industrial revolution in Europe that we were not allowed access to, as the article states, about being denied any kind of industrialization technology to process anything. It was just about, extract the resource, extract the raw materials, take. They process it. And it's kind of similar to what they do with the cocoa. They take the cocoa, take it to Europe, Jamaica, they take the coffee, take it to wherever, they process it, package it, and then want to sell it back to you for a higher price. That's unacceptable. That's completely unacceptable. And then you have the issue of our own products being more expensive to buy, and people are more willing to buy imports from other countries. Again, and all these things, now that you see this ties into the health point that we're talking about earlier. Now you want to start importing stuff from the US that is no good for anybody, that isn't fit for human consumption a lot of times, and bring all this cancer and all these illnesses about. But we won't push our own products, and we have the capability of doing it. You can research the different parts of the Caribbean, because it's not just islands. We also have countries, South America and Central America, Belize, Guyana, Suriname. We have the capability of growing our own things. And not to say that it doesn't happen, because I've seen, products of Caribbean origin within, supermarkets and so on and so forth. But I think there should be an even bigger push back from these imports. Imports cost money. Why are we not investing in agriculture and agro processing? Why don't we develop more superior products and be able to sell them to other people then to make the money, instead of relying on people to come to the country and spend money? Now it's a pandemic, and all of a sudden certain countries want to know about their diaspora and say, hey, you can come back now. It's ridiculous. But I'm gonna put the StreamYard link out there if anyone wants to hop onto the panel. But all in all, this 10-point program, it's okay. It's okay. There's a lot of things that I don't agree with, and I feel like our own governments should be able to handle that. And we need to kind of stop the excuse making and really focus. If you're serious about it, you can just focus on it. Fine, you want to take a loan, you want to drive us into some more debt, okay, but drive us into more debt in order to be able to make that money back. And it makes me question a lot of the competence of these so-called leaders that we have. Right now, I put this banner up. So the CRC recognizes the persistent harm and suffering experienced today by these victims as primary cause of development failure in the cap. Right. This is something that I do take an issue with, is now we're saying that because of slavery, we can't develop. And again, it's a yes and no. We have a mindset, or let me not say we, all of us. I'll speak for Barbados. From my experience, from what I've heard, from what I've seen, right, from what I've experienced, there's a certain mindset that people just, it's a very almost abusive relationship between people and the government, where there's such a heavy reliance on the government, knowing at the same time that the government will show you contempt, and they don't really care enough to make sure that you have what you need, but you still depend on them heavily anyways. You see, this mindset of, these people that who we view as high above us, they have to do everything for us. I feel like that is the primary cause of developmental failure, and these governments who are either incompetent, don't care, or both play a part in the lack of development. Because again, if they were really serious about development, I don't see how anyone could look at the idea of tourism and have that as such an integral part of the economy, and providing jobs. I don't understand how you could be so for development. That's a real question. How can you be saying you're for development and everything is damn near service based with some of our economies? We allow these foreign corporations to come in and pay little tax. Where's the development in that? The only thing that's developing is these people's bank accounts with more and more money, and incentives that they're given. Now, when it's coming to today, again, development does need to happen, yes. And I've said this, I push for this, is that people in the African Caribbean diaspora, especially here in the UK, because I really feel like we have nothing to show for us being in this country, since the late 1940s. Why are we not just taking the skills that we have, the education that we have, right? Not going back home to rule people, no, but go there to teach the skills to help uplift the population. Why are we not doing that? Granted, there has been like a brain drain. You've got all these people going to the UK thinking, the streets are paved with gold. They literally thought these things because this is what they were told. The mother country needs you, so on and so forth. Okay, we're here now. We've got qualifications, we've got experience, and so on and so forth. And this 10-point plan is talking about, well, we want all of these things, all this technological advancement from Europe. Why don't we bring it back? Why aren't we doing that? Why do we need to rely on Europeans for that? You see, a lot of this stuff could be sorted out in house if you have the right people doing the right things. We can't claim to care and then we do nothing about our situation. But I mean, I think that's pretty much it. I think I've addressed all my points um, about this topic. Like I said, you can click on the description box. It's got the link to this 10-step program if you want to read it for yourself, and the Discord link as well, so you can join the Discord group. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Leave your thoughts and stuff like that in the comments if you want, and yeah, that's pretty much it. Have a good night.